It's always been fascinating to pick up a book and immerse yourself in a world created solely in your mind, bringing words to life with nothing but your imagination. However, when a book gets adapted to film, we see another's vision of this world in which we already had preconceived notions about. Often they'll make changes to the way that a character looks, going against the descriptions in the book. Or perhaps they'll swap characters entirely to give another a bigger role. Sometimes entire sections of a book with important story threads will be missing from the film itself. These changes can simply be chalked up to the fact that adapting a book into a screenplay is an arduous task. The filmmakers have a lot of material to pull from, but need to condense the most important themes into a digestible movie length. But what about a movie being adapted to a novel? Surely it must be easier to write a story that is faithful to the original product when the roles are reversed, right? Well, if I've learned anything after spending countless hours poring over these books and films, finding every minute deviation possible, I can tell you that the answer is rather perplexing. So let's take a look together as we break down the insane differences between the Sonic books and movies. From the jump, the first novel gives us a very similar vibe to the first movie, as Robotnik is in hot pursuit of the blue blur, but things are a bit different already, only one page deep. While the movie shows Sonic dashing across the streets and buildings of San Francisco, carefully weaving his way in and out of Robotnik's barrage of lasers, the book depicts an entirely different situation. We open with Sonic jetting across the San Francisco Bay, and as the book states, he's moving faster than lightning. Robotnik follows across the body of water, releasing a salvo of heat-seeking missiles. The opening here feels very familiar to the film, as it sets up Sonic's final battle with Robotnik before we see the origins of this story. However, there are a few interesting things to note. Here, Robotnik uses heat-seeking missiles to dispatch Sonic. This is something that we see his badniks use in the film, and we know that the speed of the missiles can't match Sonic's, as he's easily able to avoid them. It's only when Robotnik utilizes the power of Sonic's quill that he can match Sonic's speed with his firepower, and we see this in the form of a red laser-like energy. So it's odd that the book has him using missiles in the final battle, but it's not as odd as having this battle partially take place on the water. See, this is rather interesting, because in the sequel novel we learn that Sonic wasn't quite positive yet if he could run on water. The book makes it pretty evident that he didn't try until he needed to because he was afraid of drowning, and for the most part, the second movie backs this up, as Sonic was very wary of having to run across the water, knowing that one slip could mean his certain doom. The overall theme and feel of the intro is the same, but it just goes to show that even little changes can make a huge difference in the story. When the book takes us back to Sonic's homeworld, it gives us a better feel for the world and its inhabitants, more so than the movie did, which is something that I really appreciate. I love lore, so hearing more about Longclaw and this island was great. The book informs us that Longclaw is indeed the last of her kind. She was part of an order of warrior owls who are all outfitted with blades and armor. Together, they tried their best to maintain peace and order throughout the galaxy. We learned that Longclaw needed a place to hide Sonic, because by her own omission, Sonic's blue fur and electric speed were indescribable, even with all the weird things that she had seen across different worlds. Because of this, she took him to a world where animals had evolved to become the dominant species. It was a cruel world ruled by Claw and Fang, but Longclaw had found an island where she thought the boy would be safe as he grew up. We get to see a bit more of the relationship between Sonic and his surrogate mother, and before he gives her the sunflower that we see in the film, Sonic tries to pull a prank on her. However, knowing the dangers of the world that they lived on, Longclaw was on edge, and when startled, reached for her scabbard. When the echidnas finally arrive in the book, we start to get a bit deeper with the lore, and this isn't really touched upon until we get to the second movie. During the Echidna Warrior raid, Sonic actually recognizes the emblem that the echidnas bore on their hoods. The emblem was a symbol used by a warlord who wanted the chaos energy within him so that he could take over the world. This warlord in particular had been tracking Sonic nearly his whole life. In the film, baby Sonic seems very caught off guard that there are others out there that would want to do harm to him and take his powers. But in the book, that couldn't be further from the truth. Sonic is very much aware of these warlords who are most likely akin to those depicted in the second movie. Back to the raid, baby Sonic is itching for a fight, trying to convince Longclaw that he can use his powers to shock the echidnas. Longclaw denies this, knowing it's a bad idea, because in the books, it's not just a tribe, it's an army. So plentiful in fact, that it was creating dark veins across the island when the two tried to escape. This of course brings up some questions upon reaching the second book and film, because Knuckles is supposed to be the last Echidna warrior, and it really makes you wonder how Longclaw could have defeated an army that was so numerous. Longclaw tells Sonic that he isn't meant for chaos, which is a theme that you'll hear a lot about in this video, as the book is obsessed with talking about chaos and chaos energy, despite the films not elaborating on this concept. Longclaw then mentions that she doesn't want Sonic to be a pawn in the Echidna's games, and wants him to go to Earth because there, they're ignorant of the greater universal order. This goes against the ideas brought up in both the first and second movie. In the first movie, Longclaw wants Sonic to go to Earth because it's on the far side of the galaxy, keeping him out of harm's way. Later, in the second movie, we find out that Longclaw's order had also stored the Master Emerald on Earth, making it the perfect location to send Sonic. Catching up with the now older Sonic in both the book and movie, there are quite a few changes made to his character in the prior mentioned. A constant throughout both books is that Sonic uses the phrase "way past cool." This is a reference to the adventures of Sonic the Hedgehog, as well as the Archie comics where he would use the phrase. Perhaps the author of the book was a fan, or maybe the early script had Sonic using this line in the movie, but for whatever reason it was removed. Another key difference that we find out right away is that Sonic is already wearing his red sneakers. In the movie, Sonic starts off in white shoes, and as time goes on they get extremely worn down, leading to a really tender moment where JoJo gives Sonic his iconic red shoes. However, the character of JoJo is completely absent in the novel, which could explain why he is already wearing red kicks. I honestly think the movie handled this a lot better. A major component of the story is that Sonic feels alone. He has no friends, no family, and doesn't fit in. So having JoJo, who like Sonic is just a child, caring about this alien creature whom she had just met is a very wholesome moment that is rewarding to both the hero of the story and us the viewers as he dons his signature red shoes. But with those minor character details out of the way, we get a bit of a different introduction to Tom. Much like the movie, Tom spends his day bored out of his mind at the speed trap, cracking jokes to the turtles that pass him by. And just like the movie, Sonic begins to mess with him, trying to clock his speed. But the Tom in the books proves to be a bit more perceptive, as he manages to catch a glimpse of Sonic's shadow, and upon exiting his car to investigate, Sonic runs by, causing a huge gust of wind to plant him down in the gravel. Sonic ends up proving himself to be a bit of a menace here, as he also steals Sergeant Sprinkles, who we see Tom talking to later in the movie while he's practicing his resignation from the Green Hills Police Department. Things for the most part play out the same as they did in the movie, that is until we get to Robotnik. And just like how Sonic dons his signature red shoes early on in the books, Robotnik is decked out in a red lab coat from the get-go. This change in the book made me appreciate what the movies did with the character of Robotnik even more. While it may not seem like a striking difference at first glance, I think that having Robotnik be this character that becomes more and more unhinged in the movies is a great way to depict his persona. For the audience, his outfit becomes a visual representation of his decay into madness, as he obsesses over the destruction of this blue hedgehog, slowly morphing into a look that's more like the Robotnik that we're familiar with in the games. The book's choice to have him start off in a red lab coat instead of the black one in the movie voids this visual representation entirely. Is it more accurate to the games? Sure, but it loses out on having the significant meaning to it that the movies bring. I will say, however, that the book gives us a great understanding of Robotnik's character, and he begins to feel like a mix between the Archie version of Robotnik and the games. Arriving at the focal point of the blackout, Robotnik summons his drones, which in the book he calls his botniks, and through his glasses he begins to receive every piece of data that they transmit as they search for the cause of the blackout. The book cuts back to Tom, and I'll have to admit that I think the first book made me appreciate his character more than the movie ever did. We see a sense of humor from him that's lacking in the film and made me have more fun with the character overall. For example, when going after the raccoons with the dart gun, Tom starts joking to himself about how they hospitalized his partner and he won't let them escape justice. It's little moments like that which add life to his character. He breaks in to find the raccoons and, well, you know the rest.
Pause in here! Meow?
I found it funny though that in the book, Tom manages to shoot Sonic in the neck instead of the leg. But funny enough, Sonic doesn't really have a neck, and the only version of Sonic that I know that does is the original movie design for him. So as Tom is helping Sonic recover from the dart, Sonic mentions that this situation is life or death for him, and the book really makes it clear that hearing those words was the call to action that Tom had been waiting for his entire life. As a cop, he had made a difference and helped out around Green Hills, but he wanted a moment to prove himself a hero and make a big change in his community. Agreeing to help Sonic, we see more of Tom's humor in the book, as he quotes Terminator saying,
"Come with me if you want to live."
And I'm telling you guys, the references that Tom makes in the book are hilarious, and I'm truly surprised that they weren't in the movie. When Robotnik begins to approach Tom's house, we get a weird internal monologue and learn just how much he hates the Constitution, because without it, he'd be able to barge right in. In his head, he mentions shredding it and wanting to live in a fully automated world. The books do a good job conveying the message that Robotnik really dislikes humans and wants to roboticize the world. The scene of Robotnik and the drones looking for Sonic play out almost one-to-one from book to film, but in the book, Sonic uses his speed to attack a Botnik, and the book informs us that he was able to achieve this short burst of speed despite getting hit by the dart because of how fast his metabolism works. So the effect of the dart was wearing off much faster than it would for anyone else. This isn't significant to the plot at all, but I did find it rather interesting that the book described that. It reminded me of Flash comics and how his metabolism works differently due to being a speedster. During the duo's getaway, the book shares with us a very heartfelt moment between Sonic and Tom. Sonic has an internal monologue stating that the way Tom looks at him is the very same way that Longclaw did. This not only foreshadows Tom's father-son relationship with Sonic, but also shows us Sonic's need for a mentor in life. He is still a child and trying to find his place in the world. Here we get to see how much Sonic looks up to Tom, someone who he views as a hero already, even if Tom doesn't see it in himself yet. Despite this moment, Sonic lashes out about his problems to Tom, stating that he's just a teen and everything in his life sucks, which is something that Tom tells Sonic he can relate to. Sonic ends up staying with Tom during this fight in the car and doesn't end up running off like he does in the movie counterpart. And while this again is a little change, I really like this, as the two felt like they were bonding more. In the movie, it can almost be interpreted that Sonic just needs Tom for the sake of directions, or that Tom feels guilt-tripped into helping. During the duration of the road trip, Sonic catches Tom up with mesmerizing stories about faraway worlds where Sonic and Longclaw hid away. And being able to communicate and share all these stories to someone who can actually listen and react made Sonic realize just how much he had missed talking to someone. The book does a really good job capturing some of these deeper moments and showing us the toll that isolation has had on Sonic after all these years, as well as give us some emotional bonding between the two that the movie doesn't afford us. As Sonic and Tom arrive at the Piston Pit, there's a few more details in the book that the movie doesn't focus on. For one, the patrons definitely notice something is wrong with Sonic, while in the movie it's brushed over pretty quickly. One of the best scenes in the first film is Sonic's Quicksilver-esque moment where time essentially stops for him during a brawl in the Piston Pit. Sonic goes on a rampage, pranking and taking out everyone who lies in his path, much like Quicksilver in Days of Future Past. The difference in the book is pretty interesting, as it's a flip of perspectives and we witness what Tom sees during the brawl. Punches, spit, and chairs come flying at him from all directions, but yet nothing seems to land while streaks of blue light bounce all around the bar. Witnessing the amazing power of Sonic and partaking in the chaos himself, Tom later admits that it was pretty fun to let loose and enjoy that kind of action. When our rascals depart from the brawl, the entirety of the motel scene is actually left out of the book, instead opting for the two parking behind a billboard and spending the night sleeping in the car. I'm not a huge fan of this, mainly because the movie does a good job conveying the bond that these two are beginning to have, with Tom tucking Sonic in and looking at his bucket list, which includes making a real friend. This becomes a huge moment later on when things look bleak for our heroes. Tom sticks up for Sonic, calling him his friend, which gives Sonic the boost he needs to get back up and fight Robotnik. So leaving the scene out makes the book feel like it's missing a puzzle piece to me. When the two wake up, they hit the road once again, this time with their objective not far off now. However, Robotnik is still in hot pursuit, and during this intense battle on the road, there are some major differences that we need to take a look at. Robotnik launches a dune buggy type Botnik after the two fugitives, and this causes Sonic to dub his creations Badniks due to how ugly they are. This is a line that's kind of dumb in my opinion, as it's too on the nose for me. I'm glad the movie didn't include it, but it's interesting nonetheless that this was going to be the movie's explanation of the name Badniks. In the car, Sonic shows some on-brand heroism in the book, as he offers to finish his journey alone in order to keep Tom and Green Hill safe. This is a moment that touches Tom's heart and displays Sonic's selflessness, but Tom makes sure that Sonic knows they're in this together. During this battle, Sonic gets extremely emotional as he thinks about how worse off and alone the town would be without Tom. Of course, we know that this is Sonic projecting his feelings of being alone onto the town, as he doesn't want to feel isolated again. This surge of emotion strangely powers up Sonic's quills with a flood of chaos energy, and in an instant, Sonic jumps out of the car, clapping his hands together in a thunderous shockwave that takes out the Dune Buggy as well as Robotnik's mobile lab. This powerful attack drains Sonic a lot, damaging him in the process. In the movie, a tiny bomb ends up having the same effect on the Hedgehog, taking him out of commission until they arrive at Maddie's. But I think once again the book did it better. While the tiny bomb is played off for comedic effect at first and then later has consequences, I think that Sonic channeling his emotions into a powerful attack that he can't yet control is a bit more interesting from a storytelling perspective. Just like the movie, Robotnik acquires one of Sonic's quills, but in the book we get a glimpse into his mind, which reveals his vision for a robotic revolution entirely powered by chaos energy. In the meantime, Tom and Sonic reach Maddie, and strangely enough, Rachel is missing as well as JoJo, which I mentioned earlier. Because of this, the interaction Tom and Sonic have with Maddie ends up being a bit bland when compared to the movie's humor with Rachel and the tender moment that Sonic shares with JoJo. As we jump ahead, Tom has a chat with Sonic when they arrive at the Transamerica Pyramid, and I really enjoyed this quote. "Emotions are powerful things, Sonic. Humans struggle with them all the time, but you don't have to struggle alone. You don't have to bottle it all up." Emotions are something that we all struggle with. It can be sadness or anger or something else entirely, and often we bottle those feelings up and fight our battles alone, which can be a hard thing to deal with. Sonic in this movie, as well as the book, is just a kid, and he has a flood of emotions that he's trying to deal with and understand. So having Tom tell him that what he's feeling is normal and he doesn't have to struggle alone was a great moment that essentially lets Sonic know that he's with family. Finally, upon reaching the top of the building, Sonic walks toward his bag of rings, and during this, the book lets us know that his nerves are getting to him, which causes his quills to start radiating a blue energy, showing us once again that his powers are directly tied to his emotions, but he can't quite control them yet. So, as Eggman arrives to ruin everything, Tom has a heroic moment that's cut from the movie. In the novel, he thrusts himself in front of Sonic and Maddie, fully ready to take on Eggman, as he calls out telling Sonic to run. In the film, he gives some lip to Robotnik, but doesn't come across as heroic here. Now, this next part of the book really intrigued me, as it explains that Sonic begins to recognize his true speed capability. Despite achieving a similar speed in the bar earlier, apparently he was having too much fun to realize what he was doing. The book also lets us know that movie Sonic is moving so fast that he's actually traveling at a pace outside the bounds of reality, which is insane to think about. This would make movie Sonic one of the most powerful speedsters in film. During this confrontation with Robotnik in the book, he makes the comment that he wants to use his botniks to destroy the world and rebuild it up as a god. The final battle plays out pretty similar to how it's depicted in the movie, however, it appears that Robotnik's drones also get powered up by Sonic's quill, which leads to them intervening as well. During this epic battle in the book, we're constantly reminded that Sonic only has a few rings left. However, this is a stark contrast to the film, where it seems like he actually has a lot. So while running away from Robotnik and teleporting around, the stakes become higher and higher in the book as the rings begin to dwindle. During this chase, the book also remarks that Sonic ran so fast up the Eiffel Tower that he left behind a trail of flames on it. It's at this point where we also get the perspectives of Tom and Maddie after landing in Farmer Simmerer's barn. The two decide to run back to the house only to find it totally trashed from the battle earlier, as well as from government agents searching it. Grabbing keys to the police cruiser, the two are about to depart for San Francisco once again to try and find Sonic, but an explosion nearby alerts the two that he's already here with Robotnik in hot pursuit. Tom turns to Maddie and asks if she trusts him. With her reply, he jumps the police cruiser off a ramp and into Robotnik's egg pod, sending Robotnik flying out onto the ground. This is a perfect example of the book making the fight a bit more action-packed, as well as making the stakes higher with Sonic's dwindling rings. But the whole idea of Sonic only having one ring left to send Eggman to the Mushroom Planet seems a bit too convenient for my taste, which is why I much prefer the film in regards to the final battle. As you may remember, Sonic gets very emotional in the film when he hears everyone sticking up for him, especially Tom calling Sonic his friend. This gives him the energy he needs to take Robotnik down. Now, in the book, it seems like they almost hint at a supersonic transformation here, because it's described as Sonic morphing into a bright, hot yellow flame as he does his flurry of attacks against Eggman. Now, maybe this is just heat from the speed, but with how different the plot of the book has already been, I really think they wanted Sonic's emotions to be the key to his powers, and we might have seen a supersonic transformation without the use of any Chaos Emeralds. But as we wrap up the first book and movie, I need to point out a scene from the end of the book that left me scratching my head. As we all know, Commander Olive Garden and future leader of Gun comes to Tom and Maddie's house to offer them a gift card for their troubles and as thanks for staying quiet. However, in the book, it's none other than Agent Stone coming to their door, and it's so weird because it feels like a Marvel post-credit scene with Nick Fury recruiting a team, as Stone leaves behind a phone that's a direct government hotline that the two can use if needed to save the day again. My mouth was wide open reading this. It was really bizarre to me because, for the most part, Agent Stone acted just like he did in the movie. I enjoy his character a lot as the evil henchman willing to do anything for Eggman, so reading that at the end of the first book really threw me for a curve. With that though, we are through the first novel and onto the second, and just like the second movie, the sequel book is a lot longer than the first, just about doubling the page count, and once again, there are some major differences in this book when compared to the theatrical release. Book 2 begins by showing us Sonic's heist, which is pretty similar to the movie, but what isn't is what Robotnik has been up to since his banishment to the Mushroom Planet. We find that he's been living inside a Mushroom Palace, which is probably akin to the Mushroom Satellite Tower that we see in the film. In order to avoid losing his mind entirely, Robotnik has constructed a makeshift dune buggy using scrap from his now wrecked egg pod from the first film. He takes this buggy out across the Mushroom Plains, getting immense pleasure from tearing up the terrain while also scavenging for edible shrooms. It's during one of these harvests that Robotnik finds a rare Byzantium-colored bioluminescent mushroom, and he proceeds to eat it. However, it doesn't take long for him to realize that this might have been a mistake, as Agent Stone, who is just a rock that he named Stone, begins to talk to him. It's during this psychedelic mushroom trip that Robotnik is led to the answer that he needs, coming to the conclusion that firing a beacon to the center of the universe will be his salvation. The rest should look pretty familiar to you. However, when Robotnik dispatches the scavengers and makes a mad dash for the ring portal, he's met by Knuckles, who comes flying out of the portal led by his fist, knocking the deranged doctor into a pile of mushrooms. When Sonic returns home from playing superhero, we get Tom's perspective on what life has been like with Sonic since taking him in, and it's evident that Tom believes early on that he's becoming a father to the kid. Like most parents, he isn't sure about what approach to use to confront Sonic, as he's worried about his sneaking around at night. Thinking about how he was raised, he decides that taking him fishing might be the best because that's how he and his dad used to bond. It's fascinating seeing Tom have this internal struggle of becoming a father and not really knowing how to go about things, ultimately relying on the bonding moment that probably meant a lot to him while he was growing up. There's a lot of emphasis in this book about slowing down and enjoying being a kid while you still can. This theme isn't really present in the movie, which focuses more so on what true heroism is and the bonds of family, which is something that I really like. However, when Tom confronts Sonic, he essentially tells him that when you're young, you feel powerful and invincible, but it doesn't mean that you can take on the world yourself. Saying that Sonic didn't like hearing that from Tom would be a huge understatement. And just like a teen, Sonic erupts in a fit of emotions, and we get this line.
You're supposed to be my friend. Stop trying to be my dad.
Which in the book seems like it came out angrier than it did in the movie. Tom seems really hurt by this statement, but he goes on to tell Sonic how much he and Maddie care about him. The emotions here seem a bit elevated, but in the movie's case, I understand that it's already a longish movie, so they need to keep things moving forward. Speaking of keeping things moving, the book tells us about Tails' journey to find Sonic, which apparently took him to various worlds where he encountered a plethora of natural disasters and booby traps all across galactic civilization. Using his Miles Electric electric device, he's been able to finally pinpoint the exact planet and location of Sonic. It's rather interesting to hear that this journey took Tails to so many different locations, and though the book doesn't describe this journey in depth any further, the prequel comic shows us all the different worlds that Tails went to in order to find his future best friend. Finally making his way to Green Hills, we get to see Tails sneak around. One of the very first people that Tails encounters is Wade, and he comments that on this planet they must make the village idiot the head of security. While Wade is distracted, we see that Tails takes full advantage of this moment, using his gadgets to hijack the police cruiser. During the house party that Sonic throws after Tom and Maddie leave, the book mentions that Sonic is blasting EDM, which is different than the song we get in the movie. The book also mentions that Sonic has the inflatable pink flamingo with him in the pool because you can't be too careful about drowning, which is a pretty good use of subtle foreshadowing, as Sonic would have to overcome that fear in order to save his friends later on. During the party, I noticed that Tom doesn't call Sonic like he does in the movie, and while it might not mean anything, it could also show that Tom in the books is starting to have a greater trust with Sonic after their talk on the boat. However, Sonic's celebration still gets cut short as the power goes out at the house. Oddly enough, the TV powers on and it goes to static, with Robotnik's face appearing on the screen as he laughs and mocks the hedgehog, flaunting his return to Earth. Much to Sonic's dismay, Robotnik introduces him to Knuckles, and in the book, Sonic makes a much bigger deal out of this, since the last time that he saw an Echidna warrior, they were chasing after him in Longclaw. Now, here's where things get really interesting. When Knuckles grabs Sonic, lifting him off the ground, he calls Sonic a child of Mobius. Mobius was the name of Sonic's homeworld in early Sonic canon in the 90s and used in the Archie comics, but this was later retconned to Earth in Sonic Adventure 2. Shortly after Tails arrives to rescue Sonic, the fox spews exposition and mentions how he's one of the few people left who's still hunting for the rumored Master Emerald, which ends up being a stark contrast to the movie, where Sonic and Tails know what the Master Emerald is, but they aren't sure if it's real. The movie version of Tails doesn't seem to be hunting for the Master Emerald at all, but rather just wants to help Sonic in any form that he can. The book also does a great job of displaying Tails' ingenuity here as an inventor, and in my opinion, better than the movie does, as we see more of his gizmos and on-the-fly thinking. Trying their best to lose the big red rage monster that is Knuckles, Tails outfits the cruiser with a device that amplifies its speed, giving the two a little moment to breathe. When Robotnik contacts Agent Stone, the tone of the book is a lot darker than the comedy that the movie aims for. One of the truckers refuses to leave the Mean Bean when Stone tries to close early. From Robotnik's end of the call, all that can be heard is a chop followed by screams, implying a rather dark end for the patrons of the Mean Bean. Now, this falls in line with the prequel comic, as Agent Stone committed a hostile takeover of the cafe while Robotnik was missing, making sure to take care of anyone and everyone who stood in his way. With Stone alerted to his return, Robotnik then turns his attention to his new Echidna friend. Wanting to form an alliance, the book once again takes a turn for the weird, as it tries to give Knuckles some humor that honestly doesn't quite match the tone of the movie. Knuckles states that Echidnas don't form alliances easily, and to do so requires the removal of one's organs that are then reinserted into the other's chest cavity, which, first of all, I just didn't find that humorous. It's weird because I thought that Knuckles was the funniest part of the movie, and second, it's just really bizarre lore for the Echidnas that doesn't make sense, so I'm thankful that this line wasn't included in the film. Sonic and Tails approach Wade, and Sonic comments that Tails shouldn't underestimate him, which has me curious if we'll see some semblance of heroics from Wade in the Knuckles show when the two eventually team up. As the two enter the garage, Tails begins to feel bad about stealing and trashing the police cruiser from earlier and thinks about different ways that he can upgrade the Wade cave to make up for it. At this part of the movie, we're treated to a scene of Longclaw appearing as a hologram. She relays a message to Sonic which is not dissimilar from Princess Leia's message in A New Hope. However, we're given no explanation as to how or why this message begins to play out of nowhere. The book gives us some insight as Tails points out that they need to use the moonlight to charge the ancient circuitry of the paper. This is very reminiscent of the moon ruins in The Hobbit, where the map has vital information for the company of Thorin Oakenshield that can only be accessed via the light of a certain moon. I really like this addition in the book as it filled a few functions. To start, we see the importance of Tails as he has a vast wealth of knowledge that Sonic doesn't. Beyond that, it provides an explanation for the message activating. In the movie, it really doesn't make sense why it activated at this moment, moment. This was a memento that Longclaw gave Sonic, which would make it safe to assume that Sonic pored over this map multiple times since her passing. However, none of those other times it activated, but by chance it activates now? Okay, sure. It's not really a big issue, but it can certainly take you out of the movie for a second if you think about it. Receiving all this information from the message leaves Sonic with even more questions. He tells Tails that Knuckles mentioned something to him called Mobius, and he asks what it is, to which Tails replies that Mobius is the traditional homeworld of their kind. The way that the book sets all of this up makes me very curious if there are future plans in the third movie to explore more of Sonic's homeworld, or perhaps initially that was an idea that was on the table and they just decided to drop it. Either way, Sonic's ready to fulfill the mission that Longclaw had set before him. He begins to plan his next step when out of nowhere Tails volunteers to go with him on this potentially treacherous journey. This is a night and day difference from the Tails that we get in the film, where he's still very timid and Sonic actually has to just outright say, "You're coming with." I much prefer Tails volunteering to come along on this journey because we know that Tails has already overcome a lot to get to Sonic. Having Tails finally reach his hero and then choose not to follow on a world-saving adventure is a bit of an odd choice to me. He can still have room to grow along the journey and have fears to overcome even if he volunteers to embark on this quest. Tails gets a good arc in this movie, don't get me wrong, but I really think that the book pulled this moment off better by having him willingly volunteer to come. When our two heroes make it to Siberia, they engage the locals in a dance battle for their lives. In the film, it's a really nice moment where they go from being called freaks and almost being tossed into a fire to winning the locals over with their fun dance. This is a big moment once again for Tails, as his whole life he's been made fun of. But here he overcomes that fear and shows that being different isn't a bad thing. The book plays this moment out quite differently though, as the dance moves and holograms are used to take down the Siberians and not win them over. Sonic begins to spin incredibly fast, and Tails captures this on his device. He sends the hologram copies out, and the locals get sick from the motion, and one by one, each of them pass out. This totally negates the important moment for Tails. The next interesting change occurs when Robotnik and Knuckles arrive in Siberia to shake things up for our heroes. Tails and Robotnik get into a scuffle over the compass that Sonic had acquired a little bit earlier. During this battle, Robotnik gets pretty dark and mentions how he wants to stuff and mount Tails on his wall. Once again, we're treated to another great Tails moment that isn't featured in the movie, where Tails uses a device to remotely take over the egg pod that Robotnik was in and knock him around the mountainside till he drops the compass. This was a great moment in the book because Robotnik's ego takes a major blow as he finally comes to realize that there's someone else out there who can match his intellect. Tails is then hit by a missile just like he is in the film, but now Sonic is faced with two options: go after the compass, which is about to fall off the side of the mountain, or save his new friend Tails. In the movie, Robotnik already has the compass, and it's more of a no-brainer for Sonic to go save his buddy. If you haven't noticed by this point, a large section of the movie has its fat trimmed in the book. The section that I'm talking about would be the Hawaii wedding subplot. Rachel is actually mentioned in the book this time, but her daughter JoJo is once again absent entirely. This part of the book gets really weird because Commander Olive Garden shows up, now leading Gun, and he mentions the hotline that he gave to them in the first book, even though that never happened in the first movie. It's weird that he mentions that because the second book retconned a lot of what the first got wrong, such as Sonic running out of rings. So when I was reading this, I was genuinely confused why they brought up that minor detail from the first book, especially since it was actually Agent Stone that gave them the phone anyways. But with all of that weirdness aside, we get an interesting moment between Knuckles and Robotnik. Robotnik, now having the compass, inquires Knuckles as to what he will do once he obtains the Master Emerald, and Knuckles mentions that he plans to lift the capital temple of Echidna Society from the sinking ruin that it's become and restore it to its former glory. He also implies that he might be able to restore the Echidna people with the power of the Master Emerald. The book then cuts back to Hawaii, and we get a POV of Tails as Maddie breaks in and frees everyone. This is a pretty big deviation from the movie, because in the film we get to see Maddie team up with her sister Rachel in order to save Sonic, Tails, and Tom from the gun agents. And while a lot of people didn't like this part of the movie, I personally thought it was fun, and it was nice to have Maddie's character do a bit more than she did in the first Sonic movie. With Sonic now free, the others try to convince him to go stop Robotnik from acquiring the Master Emerald, since he's the only one who could get there in time. But Sonic is scared of Knuckles. As he says in the book, he's bigger and stronger than him. Reading this felt kind of weird to me. Sonic has always been one of those heroes where even if he's scared, he hides it well, and he still does the heroic thing. And I get that he's a kid in this book and movie, but the movie handles this moment moment much better in my opinion, as it really feels true to Sonic's character. He'd rather rush in alone, not wanting his friends to get hurt, rather than be too scared to act. Regardless, he reaches the temple, and the huge wrecking ball that we see almost land on him in the movie begins taking out the structural integrity during the fight with Knuckles. And when the water begins to flow in, the book gives us a very dramatic depiction of this scene, where Knuckles is trapped under a pillar. Unlike the movie, the water in the temple rises a bit slower, and the scene is very reminiscent of Lost Season 6, Episode 14, The Candidate, where after an explosion, one of the main characters is pinned under debris while water slowly rises. With only her husband left to try and save her in a situation that looks ever more grim, this scene had me weeping like a baby upon my first viewing. And while the emotions aren't nearly as high here in the Sonic Movie 2 novel, I appreciate the tone that the book is going for. As the water rises, the situation looks dire, and Knuckles begins to give up hope, thinking that this indeed is a fitting end for him. In this moment, he views himself as nothing but a complete and utter failure, having failed to obtain and protect the one thing that his ancestors wanted him to. His whole purpose in life was leading him to this very moment, and it was squandered. But just like the movie, Sonic wasn't gonna let him go out like this. The two save each other and end up floating on a piece of driftwood out at sea. Knuckles is confused as to why Sonic saved him. Since birth, he was told that the owls were savage barbarians who needed to be stopped in order to save the world. By extension, he believed that Sonic would be the same way. And here we see Knuckles upset and conflicted with emotion, as he realizes that his entire life had been a lie. This whole section of the book ended up being deeper than I ever believed the Sonic book would be, but I really enjoyed it, and I think it makes a lot of sense, especially with all the things that these characters have gone through. During the final act, Robotnik achieves his goal from the first book by finally achieving the level of godhood. Using this newfound power gifted by the Master Emerald, he begins to read others' minds in order to stay one step ahead of everyone. When our trio of heroes arrive to fight, Knuckles calls out to Robotnik, calling him a deceiver. Robotnik replies that that's his middle name, and then he says, "Oh wait, that's a lie too. My middle name is Gerald," which of course is a reference to his grandfather Gerald Robotnik, who's the one responsible for Project Shadow. Now, a lot of the end act is very similar to how the movie portrays it, with a few minor changes here and there. But one of the most interesting differences in the book is that when Super Sonic is talking to Robotnik, his voice is so powerful that it alone shakes the trees around them. Sonic also opts to dodge Robotnik's punch at the end instead of shattering the arms off of his machine. And in this moment, we see true fear from Robotnik in the book that's lacking in the movie. And finally, with the day saved, Sonic gives Knuckles the shards of the Master Emerald, and Knuckles seems very devastated, but Sonic tells him essentially to restore it, and that they need Knuckles to use it once again if they need it to contain all 7 Chaos Emeralds. It's a bit weird that Sonic knows that the Master Emerald can just be restored by, touching your hands together, but hey, whatever. Well guys, with that, we've gone through the insane differences in the Sonic books and movies. These books are rather interesting. I wasn't even aware of their existence until not long ago. I had grabbed the second book first, and when I read the first few chapters and started noticing all these weird differences, I knew I had to make a video to discuss this with you guys. All of these changes are really interesting to me, and I'm sure some of you guys have insight on this that I don't. Oddly enough though, I didn't find myself necessarily liking one medium over the other, but I think the book added a lot of weird moments that didn't make sense or just didn't need to be in there. On the flip side, the book allowed for more emotional character growth that I didn't even see coming. With the third movie on the horizon, it'll be interesting to see if they decide to include another tie-in book, because the changes in these novels are very strange. But let me know what you guys think. Have you read the Sonic books and do you like them? If you want more Sonic lore, breakdowns, and news, check out the video here. As always guys, I am wishing you all the best. Happy holidays, take care, peace.